Okay, so welcome to Beauty of Colors podcast, JD. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
So tell the listeners about you and what started you on the path of doing what you do right now.
Yeah, well, that's a long kind of circuitous story, right? I grew up in the Northwest, outside of Seattle, and I was a pretty rambunctious teenager. Grew up without my dad around a lot, and my mom kind of did the best she could to keep me out of trouble.
Mhm.
And I pretty clearly, I dropped out of school, and I saw that there wasn't really a lot of opportunity that I was interested in the town that I was in.
Mhm.
And Seattle wasn't what it is today. It's like I was just back there for a month, and it's like insane now. It's a very different city, but it was a pretty sleepy city, and I was doing pretty. I was doing like labor jobs. Like I was unloading trucks at a warehouse and working in a body shop and working in restaurants. So I decided to move to New York City with a duffel bag in 2005. I just had this thing. I remember I was delivering a copier to a construction site in Seattle, and they were excavating the pit for like a new tower. And they must have been down, I don't know, 4 or 5 stories in the ground. And I looked down in there and I was like, whoa, how do you even do this? Like, how does this work? And I started kind of putting some energy into real estate finance, commercial real estate finance, and just like understanding how that whole thing works. And I had no exposure to it. And I finished school in New York, and I got a job at a private equity fund that was investing in commercial real estate deals. And it was right before the financial crisis. The market crashed, and I was the cheapest labor. And so they fired a lot of the guys that were in front of me. And I worked with a couple of senior guys who were very, very smart and very kind guys, and really taught me a lot, um, just about how to look at investments. And in the middle of the crisis, I ended up taking a job at Lehman Brothers, that doing workouts and restructurings in their real estate portfolio. And coming out of that, it was only about 4 years of experience. I felt like I wanted to try to do something on my own. And so I went out and started a real estate investment company. I had no investors and no real plan other than trying to tie up deals. And the timing ended up being really good because it was at the end of 2012 and the market was starting to kind of stabilize. And capital was starting to flow again. And so I went from zero assets and zero investors at the end of 2012 to like the middle of 2014. I had acquired about $250 million worth of property and mostly development sites. And I started building on my as the developer. And that was a very interesting journey for me because I always kind of felt like that wouldn't be possible for me to do, you know, internally.
Mhm.
And I got to the point where I like capitalized the biggest deal that I had done to date, which was it was about $100 million construction loan. And I I had like an internal crisis about like what life is all about. I was let's see, this was 2016, so I was 34,
Mhm.
and in in the driver's seat on a big development deal and a bunch of other real estate deals that I had acquired.
Mhm.
And I felt for the first time like I was like really in trouble in life.
Mhm.
Like I didn't know what was going. I didn't know what to do next. Even though I knew the path to like building stuff was very clear to me.
Mhm.
I had 2 young kids. I was spending 25 days a month on the road,
Well,
and I felt that even though I was trying not to recreate what I had experienced as a kid with my dad not around very much,
mhm.
I realized that I was creating that uh, sort of subconsciously by being so busy. And that made me take like a very deep internal look at my life and just kind of how I view, the role of a father and a parent and a husband and a human. And I just kind of realized like, you know, if I die tomorrow, most of the stuff that I'm doing doesn't really matter. Right. So it just became pretty clear to me to start like unpacking that. And as I did, I just realized, like, my kids I created them with love, and I want to nourish them as much as possible. And you can't really do that when you're not around. And so I started making, small changes at first of just picking them up from school and dropping them off every day, and trying to travel less. And then it just evolved into this thing that they became like the focal point of my whole life. And we moved out of New York right before the pandemic and lived in Hawaii for a couple of years, which was amazing. And we bought a small farm in Costa Rica during the pandemic. And we decided to just hit the road. We kind of curtailed all of our financial obligations as much as we could for a family of 6. I have 4 kids now. And we've just been on the road, traveling around. I homeschool them. We learned to surf this year, snowboard. They're learning how to hunt, and they know how to fish from all the time that we spent fishing, and just, really appreciating every day with them.
So you guys are a nomad family, just traveling around.
Yeah. Yeah. We've been on the road for almost a little over a year and a half.
And how did it feel growing up without a father in your life?
It was something that I was aware of very young. I actually met my dad in a courtroom. So I have like a very clear memory of like the first time meeting him. And I think for a young man, I can only speak from my experience from a young male's perspective. I always was seeking his approval, even though it never really came. Right. I always had that drive to like do something important enough for him to pay attention. And it was a real challenge, like going through your teenage years as a young boy that was around, I grew up in a small town, but in kind of like a rough and tumble neighborhood. And so I was around a lot of pretty rowdy kids. And, if you don't have somebody there to take a stern line with you, things can go sideways pretty quick. Like I saw a lot of my friends go to jail, and a lot of my closest friends did time in federal prison after I left. And so, it's a major vacancy in your life.
So do you have a connection right now with your dad as you grew older, or do you guys have a connection?
Yeah, right before the pandemic, I took him to dinner in LA. We hadn't talked for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I had reached a point just through my own internal growth of I forgave him for not being there, which was really like,
Mm-hmm.
I realized in it that I was forgiving myself for hating another human that much, because I really had a lot of spite. And I just told him that in person. And I think it was in that process, it actually brought me total inner peace. Like I used to have like a lot of just chaotic thoughts as I was building my business and stuff. And once I forgave him, that all that stuff just stopped. And I just saw a lot of things very clearly. And I never, forgiving him was just a very freeing process for me. And so I took him to dinner. We had a great conversation. We're not super close, but I also don't have any need for that either. Right.
Yeah,
and so, and I made it clear to him
you're
that,
growing.
like,
So yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And I found that space within myself to not expect anything from him, and not in like a tragic way, but like, I have no idea what his life has been like, and I don't know what his challenges are. And I don't hold anything against him like I did for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And letting go of that was a very freeing thing. But I made it clear that my door's open. I was like, I have 4 kids and they don't know what it means to not have a dad around. So, you can choose to be around or choose not to. I don't have an expectation, but the door is always open. And I will leave that door open for life, because I think that's like the human thing to do.
So you also have a podcast, Justin. What do you talk about? You talk about the rise of Ken, Warrior in the Garden. Can you elaborate on that? Like, what exactly is your podcast all about?
Yeah. It's mostly documenting my journey as a father, and like trying to stay as close to these kids as possible while they're young, and really be there for them and what I experience and my observations of the world. I do feel that, the world is kind of set up in a way to, whether it's by design or just, happenstance, where it requires real conscious effort to try to stay close to your family. It's very easy to just send the kids to school, which we did for years, and go off to work and then come home and be as present as you can in those moments. But, it's really kind of documenting just the journey as a father without a father through my lens today, and we have amazing experiences. I kind of view education for them as something like surfing is an education for them. Mm-hmm. We fixed our truck ourselves. Like, we did a huge job on our head gasket with just my son and I. And the growth that I witnessed from him in that experience was more than I've seen from any amount of studying or schoolwork, And so I'm just trying to document that. And, the warrior in the garden reference is like, I started training a lot of jujitsu before we left New York. And my first jujitsu is I'm not sure if you're familiar with it at all, but it's a very, okay. Yeah. It's, it's hand-to-hand combat, right? It's one of the most probably uncomfortable martial arts because you're just getting smashed all the time, right? And my first lesson, I had signed up with my son because I thought it would be good for him. Mm-hmm. And I was training a lot of Thai kickboxing at the time, but I had never done jiu-jitsu. I was like, I don't need to be that close to another human, And he was adamant that I do it as well. And so I signed up, and my first lesson was my son and my wife watching, and I got destroyed. And I was like, this cannot happen again. Like, I'm okay getting destroyed, mm-hmm. but there was something in me that was like, you need to figure this out. And, I think it's kind of the journey of masculine energy to like live in peace, but always be prepared for war. Right. Mm-hmm. That's just the way the world is. And, I get as much from gardening as I do from jujitsu, but I think with, the opposites of them are a very beautiful thing,
mm-hmm. Okay. So you have a book coming up, or you do have a book that you've published?
I haven't published yet. I've got a manuscript for a book about my journey growing up without my father and what the experience was like and what I learned from it, like the life lessons that I learned from it and how it triggered this tremendously beautiful inner journey for me.
So you're saying that your father not being around when you grew up, you kind of look at it right now as a positive thing in your life, or because of what happened, you not having a father in your life, this is who you are right now?
Well, I think life is life. Like, I don't really, mm-hmm. I let go of seeing things like good and bad, positive and negative. Mm-hmm. I had this like very wild experience while we were in Hawaii, because it was right after I had forgiven my father, mm-hmm. and the pandemic hit, and we were just sitting in Hawaii and totally surrounded by nature and the ocean and being able to see the stars after 15 years of living in New York. Right. Mm-hmm. I think if the sun came up today, it's a great day, and I wouldn't be where I am today without the experience that I have. I think that's how most people that have done work on themselves mm-hmm. view life. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm very thankful that I just kind of had something in me to question everything and just peel my life back to like the core mm-hmm. of what I value every day. Right. And I'm just trying to spend as much time with my friends and family as possible, and spread that to other people. Everyone I've talked to that had a similar situation, it seems to have some sort of challenge with that. And I especially see it in young men that grew up without fathers around. Mm-hmm. And I feel fortunate that I was able to look that deep into it, and I gave myself that space. And I want to put that out into the universe so that if somebody else reads it, it may save them a few years on struggling,
So when exactly is it going to be available? Do you have an exact date, or you're not too sure?
I don't have an exact date yet. It'll probably be like second quarter of next year, just based on where I'm at. I'm self-publishing. Mm-hmm. And my podcast is on Substack. So I try to embrace the like do it yourself stuff as much as possible. Right. I think it's valuable. Yeah.
So what do you mean by wisdom from the heart for new fathers old fathers, inspiring fathers, and maybe even some grandfathers. What do you mean by that?
Uh, I, I was able to kind of, one of the processes, like one of the things that happened to me is like, I actually physically felt my heart opening from like people call it a chakra. I didn't study any of this stuff. I actually felt like my heart bloom as I was moving through this internal process. And I think when you're aware and you see clearly, it provides a lot of wisdom about day-to-day life. And I am just trying to share that for anybody who's receptive to it. I've talked to a lot of fathers, including I work with a lot of people who are a generation older than me and their sons are 20 and they're like, how did you figure this out so young? And so I'm just trying to share that wisdom. If it doesn't really, we've kind of lost this connection to like elders in our community in a lot of ways. And the way I look at it is like your wisdom is what gives you the ability to teach something, right? Your experience. And I'm not saying I'm trying to be a teacher, but I think the people are looking at others who have found wisdom for insight and advice. And the internet is a beautiful thing because of that. It can be a beautiful thing. It's not always the nicest place, but my view is like share what I've learned. I've already got ideas for another book on like fatherhood. I call it like fatherhood, a field manual, right? And just making it this very simple, like principles that I learned, like doing jujitsu. It's like, pick a martial art for you and your child and do it together. This is an important thing. There's a connection there through physical movement and training in these things that I think builds important connections.
So how can the listeners get in touch with you?
The best way is to follow the podcast on Substack, and that's it's riseofkin.substack.com. That's where I publish, and trying to do it more regularly.
Okay.
And that's the best way. Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any last words for the listeners on focusing on their goals and not giving up?
Yeah, I think be patient with yourself. I think give yourself the space and allow that space to exist in life, whether that's through meditation or walks or journaling or whatever you're doing. Just, give yourself the space to process things. And it's okay to wake up every day with a new lens.
Thank you, JD, for being on Beauty of Colors podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the time.